Foreign direct investment driving development. Sustainable growth through knowledge transfer. Technology as a solution. Innovation as a way forward. Over 70 ministers, 140 countries, over 500 exhibitors, 8,000 square meters of exhibition, 15,000 businessmen and investors. The annual investment meeting, sustainable development through FDI-induced innovation and technology transfer.
Thank you for being here. Just want to make sure everybody's in the right place. This is the capacity building workshop. The main focus of this workshop is going to be foreign direct investment attraction. Is this where everybody wants to be? Yes? Okay. So we've got, I think, a huge geographic representation in the room, everything from the US to the region here, a lot of representation from Africa, Asia, Russia. I think you'll find that no matter where you're from, the challenges are the same. And David and I are going to address a lot of those challenges and hopefully leave you with some real practical steps that you can implement back home in your own setting. If you find that we're speaking too fast, or if you find that certain phrases that we use are not clear, please interrupt us and we'll be happy to stop and explain or repeat what we're saying. Okay, so I'll hand it over to my colleague David for an overview of the trends.
Okay, we've got a lot to go through. You're going to see there's quite a lot of slides on here. Now, what I'm going to try not to do is baffle you purely with numbers. What I want to try and do is really give you a sense in terms of what are the trends, where is investment going, what's driving that investment. What we're also going to do is really tap into what the theme of this conference is about, which is to look at the development of the high-tech industry as well. So I think really, hopefully the next 20 minutes or so, it will look like we're covering a lot of information. Each of you have attended, as long as you've given your details, you'll get a copy of the presentation. So don't worry about trying to write everything down that you see. You can obviously take that home with you afterwards, once you've spoken with the audience. So, let's start off. Really, a bit about what we're going to do here. I'm going to just give you a bit of an introduction in terms of what's happening. We're going to look at some global FDI trends in terms of inflows. Also, some regional trends. So, obviously, talking about what's happening globally is one thing, but what does that mean for Africa? What does that mean for Asia? What does that mean for the Middle East? What does it mean for the rest of Europe? And so on. So, we'll be really breaking it down from there. Then we're going to be looking at outflows. So, what are the key source markets? How's that changing? And it is changing. The reality is, 5-10 years ago, the US was dominating the outward investment. It still is the dominant source of outward investment. But obviously, don't forget, there's emerging places like China, for example, that's massively now. They've got a good global, go global policy. Their companies moving overseas, they're looking at opportunities. And I think, again, that's the thing that we're going to be touching on, not necessarily just in this session. I think over the coming days, you're going to see a lot of coverage of that. Then we'll also be looking at sector trends. So again, really looking in terms of what are the big growth sectors? What have been the sectors that have been driving foreign investment over the past 5-10 years or so? And then I'm going to be focusing on, particularly looking at growth sectors, focusing on R&D, design, development, testing, and ICT related projects. And finally, we're going to look at some of the motives. So when you guys are formulating, or those from the investment promotion side, when you're formulating your investment propositions, what are the key salient messages you guys need to be pushing on? Again, this is something that my colleague Andreas will be touching on during his presentation as well. So, I'm not going to bore you to death with this one here. I'm going to let you guys read that at your own time. This just gives you a general overview in terms of Conway and our various services. We provide services from PR right way through to Andreas' division there, who do the advisory. We also do events. In fact, last month, myself and the delegation, we were in Sharjah, where we did the World Forum for Foreign Direct Investment. Very interesting forum, lots of really good speakers. We had the likes of Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who was the founder of the World Wide Web. And he was talking about what advancements, what's that going to mean for us in this space? What does it mean for investment promotion professionals? We also do training. We've got Site Selection Magazine. We do some association management as well. And you'll see right at the bottom here, the Global FDI Association. So again, this is something that's designed really to represent the interests of the companies themselves. So let's look at the actual introduction itself. What does this all mean? So what's happening? From an inflow perspective, I think it's best to describe as cautious optimism. So that means that there is, companies now are looking to make investments, but they're being very cautious about it. They're not just coming out back into the 2007, 2008 period where there was a lot of investment going on. It is happening, it is coming back, but obviously it's being very cautious. So again, if we go back to those people who work in the government side for the IPAs, your value propositions need to be watertight. You need to put a really compelling argument together as to why a company should make an investment. We've also got, looking at growth. Growth is, FDI has been up 9% in 2013. It's expected to continue over the next 3 years. So 2014, obviously last year, 15, which we did see a slight increase last year, 15 and 16. FDI into developed countries was up by 9% to 39%. So they're increasing their share. So again, this is really touching on the fact that there's this kind of uncertainty at the moment. So again, we're seeing a slight increase in developed countries. Developing countries, though, still account for the lion's share at 54%. Okay, but fragility exists in emerging and transition markets. So when we talk about the kind of fragility, what we're referring to here is looking at political instability. This is having an impact. This is making people nervous. So again, we need to be aware of what impact that's having in terms of investment trends. Developing and transition economies now constitute half of the top 20 ranked by FDI inflows. So we have seen a dramatic shift. I suppose it started about the last 5-10 years ago, and it's just becoming more and more pronounced. So we are seeing that they are taking an increasing share of the global FDI. In terms of Asia, developing Asia continues to be the region with the highest FDI inflows. No real surprise, I think most of you are aware of that in the market. So particularly our friends from Malaysia at the back there, and obviously from Macau as well, there's an opportunity there. FDI inflows increased in all regions except for the Middle East last year. Again, that's really been led by the fact there's a little bit of instability in the region still, a lot of uncertainty. But again, we're expecting that to change. That will stabilize. FDI into Africa was up 4%. So this is particularly driven by strong growth in southern African countries. Continued political and social tensions continue to subdue flows into North Africa. There are exceptions. It's not just broadly across the board that there's a lack of investment there. But there are places like Morocco have been doing particularly well in light of that. Resurgence of FDI into the US. So again, what's driving this? Well, again, partly due to the fact if you look at certain sectors like chemicals, heavy industry and so on, that's been driven by the shale gas revolution, cheaper energy prices. And finally, mega regional groups are shaping global FDI. So you look at the big transatlantic partnership and so on, all these type of regional trading partnerships are really beginning to kind of shape the future of FDI. Again, just one word of caution on that one there. US into Europe, that's actually down and continuing to go down. So it's more looking at Asia, US and so on. Those type of areas there are definitely increasing. From an outflow perspective, FDI outflows from developed markets continue to stagnate. Again, we've got an investor in the room in Martin.
Maybe, again, this is something maybe you might want to touch on a bit later. What's the kind of key, concerns from your side when you're looking at expanding the business overseas at the moment? They're 55% off their peak of 2007, 2008. That's a significant number in terms of difference between the peak and where it is right now. Outward FDI from both transition and emerging markets is increasing though, which is encouraging. They are looking, again, China has its go global. What's the opportunity there? What does this mean for you guys in the room from the investment promotion side, or even those seeking partnership? What are the opportunities there? Asia now accounts for a fifth of global FDI outflows. That's a dramatic increase from where it was 10 years ago. Outward FDI from Africa is on the rise. So again, we're seeing a lot of companies within the African continent now looking to grow their businesses overseas. Communications is one of the fastest growing sectors. And again, this is becoming more and more pronounced. Again, you look at it now, you walk down any street, most countries you go to now, you will see that most people have smartphones. The smartphones obviously need data centers. Smartphones need high-speed broadband to be able to function. So again, we're seeing big opportunities or big increase in communication investments. Capital investments in innovation-focused activities have reached record levels. And again, you'll see that later on in the presentation. Again, we're seeing projects across most sectors though. And energy costs and trade agreements are causing shifts in FDI patterns. I briefly touched on that just now. Companies, however, are looking for growth opportunities. They have to. Again, I think the best expression I heard recently was when I was in the UK is that SMEs are not looking to go overseas to grow. In a lot of instances, they're going overseas to survive. I think that's a really important point that you guys take on board from that side. In terms of some of the key drivers, economic and political stability. This is something, again, investors are very keen to have. Again, you've got market growth potential, along with access to flexible and skilled workforce and sustainable cost advantages. Again, this is not teaching you to suck eggs, but these are important things that investors are highlighting. Finally, companies have a broader geographical scope, and investors are even more selective and demanding. Okay, so let's have a look at it from a destination perspective. So what we're seeing here really, let's get this pointer going. So the bottom side here is developed economies. Okay, so look how it's dropped. Look, 2007 up here, it's right up here. And it's gone down, picked up a little bit, but again, it's down here. Look at the share now of developing economies. They're picking up most of the inward investment. Transition economies, so Russia, some of the CIS, and also the Balkan states and so on, again, they're showing an increase in FDI. From a regional perspective, again, it's just a different way of interpreting the data, but let's take a look at Europe. Europe's continuously going down from an FDI inflow perspective. We got North America again. It's been pretty stable, slight increase year on year. Asia, though, really now starting to take the lion's share of global FDI. Latin America and the Caribbean, again, it's been growing steadily. Likewise, we're seeing that in CIS. And then if you go through to the other ones there, Africa and Middle East, again, not a huge amount of growth, but it is still growing. So, looking at Africa specifically here, we can see South Africa dominates, then you've got Morocco, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, Tunisia, Algeria, and so on. Okay, don't worry if your country's not on here. There is information you can get to find out what's happening on that front. Looking at the top 5 sectors, this is looking really over a 5-year time period from 2009. The one in red, obviously this is in order. So financial services have driven most of the projects, then business services, communications, software, and coal or natural gas. So we can see both here, financial services is actually trending down. So from an investment perspective into Africa, financial services is not necessarily the key driver. It is still a key driver, but less so. Business services are increasing, communications are increasing, and software and IT are increasing. Coal or natural gas, primary sector investments, they're becoming less and less so, less and less important. So again, be mindful of that. Looking at Latin America, again, you can see which locations are driving this. We can see Brazil, Mexico, no surprise given the size of their markets, but you can see the other ones there as they're increasing their share. And again, we can see from their sectors. Software and IT was the leading sector for Latin America, then business services, financial services, communication, industrial machinery, all finished off the top 5 but are increasing. Okay, so Asia, again, dominated by China and India. But obviously, look at those numbers, though. It's interesting to see China's actually down from those peaks back a couple of years ago. Okay, and in terms of from a sector perspective, business services, software and IT, financial services, industrial machinery and chemicals. Interestingly, the 2 increases are in software and IT and chemicals. The other ones are declined year on year. Again, Middle East. Again, business services, financial services, software and IT, industrial machinery and communications. And really, again, it's software and IT, industrial machinery and communications that are increasing. Finally, rest of Europe, so this includes Russia and so on. You can, again, see what's happening from the Russian perspective there. And again, what's happening elsewhere within the region. And from a sectoral perspective, again, financial services, business services, software and IT, transportation, industrial machinery, and so on. So again, it's just interesting looking at how that changes by different region. Okay, from an outflow perspective, so where's the investment coming from? And again, we can see back in 2007, developed economies were dominating. Vast lion's share, but look, it's dropped right off. Developing economies are increasing their share of global FDI as a source market. So again, for those people in the room who are focusing on attracting investment, don't neglect the developed countries like the US and so on, but equally you need to have plans in place to look at penetrating those new markets. There's big opportunities in those markets. Again, from an outflow perspective, this is looking a bit repetitive now. I hope you didn't have a heavy lunch, as you'll probably wavering by now. Again, one chart I'll show you here, and you'll see it year on year. Europe's actually decreasing as a source market for FDI. US is keeping its own. But look at the increase in Asia and Oceania there. It really is increasing. So again, you need to be mindful of that when you're seeking source of investment. And again, I think this now this slide is designed to really drill into that in a little bit more detail. So again, the first ones here, we're looking at Germany, Dutch, Sweden, Switzerland, Canada. You can see their numbers really have been going down year on year. Whereas when you look at the other side of the chart, you're actually seeing increases year on year. So again, looking at the new paradigm, if you like, in terms of source markets for investment promotion. I thought this would jazz it up a little bit, a bit of an infographic here for those people who like those things. All I'm trying to do here is give you a rough understanding of where investment's going from region. So looking at the US outlook, the US is a dominant source market, but we can see here, for example, a significant amount of their investment is going to Africa. About 74 billion in an 18-month time period. Again, we can see Europe is a key destination market. Middle East, less so. Latin America, look at that, a significant amount of investment is going from the US into Latin America, and likewise into Africa. From European perspective, and again, we can see the majority of the investment is going to Asia. Obviously, there's a significant amount of investment going across the Atlantic to the US and North America. Africa, look at that, 68.9 billion. This was only an 18-month time period between January 2013 and September 2014. So again, there was a lot of investment going into that market from there. But again, within Europe, was the majority of the investment was actually going within Europe. And again, now looking from Asia, again, into Asia investment. So looking for opportunities, Chinese companies investing into ASEAN, for example. You know, this is again a huge amount of the investment, the majority of their investment that is channeled that way there. Latin America and the Caribbean, don't be fooled by that number. There's one project behind that. Anyone know what project that was? Hong Kong investment going into, I think, Guatemala, I think, the new canal.
Nicaragua Canal.
Exactly. So that really distorted the picture. So it looks like there's a lot of investment going from Asia to Latin America. It's not. It's dominated by one key project. So by sector, again, the point I'm trying to make here is quite a key one. So we can see that the bottom line there is primary. Primary investment, even in places like Africa, is actually, although it's been a key source of investment, it's declining. It's becoming less and less important. The areas that are important, it's interesting, look at this, look how services has suddenly increased year on year. It's now leading, it's ahead of manufacturing as the kind of key driver for overseas investment. That's over a 10-year time period. Top 10 sectors. So again, you might want to get your pens out now, but again, just to reinforce, you will get copies of this presentation afterwards. So we can see the dominance of services, business services, financial services, so software and IT, industrial machinery, communications, and so on. The ones in green are ones that are actually showing growth. Or these ones in particular are more high-tech related as well. In terms of growth sectors, again, we're looking at building construction materials, semiconductors, biotech. You've got pharmaceuticals, alternative renewable energy, communications, consumer electronics. So you can see the way that high-tech related investments are really shaping the investment landscape today. In terms of from a capital investment perspective, I really focused on R&D, research and development, DDT, which is design, development and testing facilities, and ICT related projects. Again, what I'm trying to really communicate, and what this graph clearly does show you, is the increase year on year in investment in these particular areas here, albeit with a slight decrease there in 2012. From this side here, what's interesting again, on this particular slide, this is where I'm really looking at comparing developing and global projects. So there's the global, which we just saw just now. Interestingly though, developed economies, their share of investments in these high-tech areas is actually increasing. That may surprise some people. Some people think, oh, it's all going to Asia. Not necessarily. There is a common issue. It's about skilled labor force. It's about the ability of talent. Where is the talent? Likewise, we can see it in developing. Again, it was increasing, it's fallen off, increasing. Again, a bit of uncertainty, it's dropped off, but the share is actually narrowing between developed and developing. So again, you need to be mindful of this. In terms of what are companies saying, when they're making their investments, what are the areas they're citing? What are they looking for when they come to make investments in these high-tech areas? Well, again, most importantly, no surprise, skilled workforce availability. So again, if you're working in the government sector for an IPA and you're looking to go and attract this type of investment, what's the most important message you should be putting in your propositions? You should be talking about the availability of the skilled workforce you have available, your labour pools. Again, domestic market growth potential, proximity to market and customers, again, that's widely sourced. I mean, again, why would a company go into a new market? Primarily, FDI is market seeking. And again, we can see now regulations and business climate, that's an important area. You've got industrial cluster, universities or researchers. So again, these are areas that, again, you might want to touch upon, making sure that you're really pushing that message through to them in your value propositions. And interestingly enough, right at the top here, IPA government support. Don't underestimate the role that you guys have to play in trying to attract investment. Make sure you've got all your ducks in a row, if you like. Yeah, it's really important that this is right. You need to get this right, and hopefully, I said over the next hour or 2 hours or so, we're going to give you some points in terms of what you can do to make that an important asset, what you guys provide. In terms of conclusions, so as I briefly touched upon earlier, confidence is gradually returning. That's important. We can see that. 4 of the top 5 source markets are still developed countries. So yes, I'm saying to you on the one hand, don't neglect the developing countries, neglect the need to go and target investment from the likes of China. But please, I urge you, don't forget where investment is still coming from. It's still dominated by developed countries. So again, the United States remains the dominant source market for FDI. Don't overlook the US. It's a dominant source market. It really has got a lot of interesting opportunities for you there. Emerging market share of outward FDI is increasing. So we saw that in the different charts. Chinese outward FDI could surpass this inward FDI this year. Who would have thought that 5 years ago? China was just receiving all this FDI was coming in. Now, as an outward, as a source for FDI, again, that's narrowed now to the stage where it might even surpass its inward FDI. In terms of destinations, though, again, we made this point very clear earlier in different slides. 4 of the top 5 are developing countries. Asia remains the largest recipient. There is increased South-South FDI as well. So for those in the room from developing markets, again, source market, developing markets are still important for you guys. There's an increase in that. India is showing impressive year-on-year inward investment flows driven by an increase in manufacturing-related FDI. Again, do I see India as the future as a manufacturing hub? Probably not. But it is, maybe it's not linked to Narendra Modi's Make in India, his big PR thing that he was drummed, that he was banging, come and make in India. But what is interesting is that more and more often when you go and look at where products are made, you're beginning to see made in India. Interesting to note that. US FDI is increasing, particularly in heavy industries and chemicals. So again, that links back to shale gas and the cheaper energy prices. From a sector perspective, FDI in pharmaceuticals is centered around developed countries, but increasingly in developing countries as well. So again, there is a need to have that. There is a need for you guys to be putting your propositions together to try and woo investors from those areas. I mean, particularly in things like clinical trials, stuff like that, there's a lot of opportunities there. FDI in extractive industry is still substantial in poorer emerging countries, but declining rapidly. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. It has in the past been a very useful source of FDI, but it's not necessarily the future. FDI in service industry is increasing in all markets. Okay, we saw earlier there was some areas where it's down year on year, but overall the trend is still upward. Rising Chinese wages are only strengthening Asia's hold in manufacturing. Factory Asia. This is not going away. This is a phenomenon that's here to stay. We're not going to suddenly see, because of higher labor costs in China, that investment is going to suddenly come out of China. No, that's not going to happen. If anything, it's going to increase in terms of the opportunity is for the peripheral markets as well. Finally, I thought I'd just put some ideas here at the bottom in terms of what developing markets, what the opportunities are. And we can see telephony, handsets, ICT and pharmaceuticals could be areas that might need further investigation from your side. On that note, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand back across to Andreas. I hope you found that useful. You will be able to get a copy of the presentation afterwards. If you have any questions, we can discuss it over the next couple of hours. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. This was very enlightening. I have some question relating to the perception that the U.S. is not only the very dominant market, but still remains very attractive from the perspective of developing countries, because influence from the U.S. to Africa is significant. But I didn't make the correlation between that inflow of investment and exactly where that investment is going.
Yeah.
Please enlighten on that, especially which countries and what sector that investment is going to.
Yeah.
From the U.S. And also, I believe, when you talk about, you said something about a regional grouping shaping in terms of global FDI.
Mm-hmm.
How is that being constructed in terms of the regional grouping? And I'm saying this from the perspective of, as I said, African countries mostly, not African countries, sorry, French-speaking countries mostly, for instance, including France and some other countries have come to create an association, in fact, this is an association of investment promotion agencies. So the goal here is to set up a platform where they can actually interrelate and share experiences and so forth, strategies and the like. So my point is, how do you see that kind of organizations and in terms of setting up policies to help each other in getting more?
Okay. There are two very big questions I think we'll need to explore, and I believe I'm having a meeting with you actually over the next couple of days, so I can maybe get a bit of the information before we meet. US investment into Africa, where's it going? What are the sectors? Again, I don't have this information off the top of my head. I could give you a split, a more detailed split, but I'll need some time to pull those numbers for you. I don't want to guess and make mistakes. In terms of the regional partnerships, so they were really looking at the mega regional groupings being, you've got the ASEAN +6. So again, that's a big area that's attracting a lot of investment right now. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, again, that's been in negotiation for a while, and that seems to be coming to fruition, driving a lot of investment going that way. Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership, TTIP though, each of those different groups account for about a quarter of FDI. But obviously in terms of the transatlantic one, that one's actually decreasing, whereas the other two are increasing. In terms of the policies that are shaping those, again, it really is dependent upon the market dynamics. So again, I think that a lot of that's been driven by the moment. There's a lot of interest in terms of the market opportunity. So that's why you're seeing an increase in particular into developing economies, like for example with the ASEAN +6, that's been driven by the market opportunity first and foremost. Again, I will get back to you in terms of looking into that in more detail in terms of the actual policies that are reshaping that.
If you don't mind, one last question on the ranking of the the factors that actually influence the investment growth. You indicated that I think the most dominant is skill, workforce, and availability, domestic market growth, and I guess yes. So those are very, very important. It's really striking that tax incentives and the like that sometimes we try to give out really doesn't vary here. Or do you count them in IPA or government supports?
No, they would have their own. They would typically be picked up as their own classification. In terms of, again, this is something Andreas and I can touch upon in more detail, but incentives in the US, incentives are king, right? Because if you're going to a big market like the US, deciding where you go quite often is driven by the package that's on offer. What we've found through experience is that incentives play a more of a secondary role elsewhere. Would you agree with that, Andreas?
Not quite.
Okay, then we've got differences of opinion. It is surprising to a certain extent. These ones here, these determinants were not talking about all investment types. These ones here referring to the R&D, design, development, and testing, and so on, which is more skill workforce related.
It's important to know where these are from. So these are the ones that were mentioned in press releases.
Yeah.
When companies said why they chose what they chose, most companies will not in a press release say, we went there because of the great incentives. They will say, we went there because of the fantastic workforce and the great government and all the other good things. So incentives are a very important factor everywhere in the world, but they tend not to be emphasized. Companies still expect them.
I think as well as that, in the US, I think you have to announce how much you've been given, I believe. Whereas elsewhere, it's not such a key thing. It's not something they have to do. But Andrea's absolutely right. Most of this information was taken from public sources, so from press releases and so on. So that might explain why certain areas that you would expect to see higher maybe aren't being touched upon. Yes, please. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but I don't want to monopolize, but maybe I'll come back.
Okay.
My question is somehow related to what has been just said now. What you presented is very much into silos, biotechnology, IT, ICT, and other things. Did you look at the global value chain in terms of value chain from value to the consumer and as well supply chain? Because sometimes in terms of investments, if you want to invest in infrastructures, you have conglomerates of either the investment fund or pension fund, things, or even trading companies willing to protect their supply chain. And so I think that picture would be highly different when you look at the flow. In terms of a business case, say, okay, I want to build a car. What do I need to build this car? I want to do biotechnologies. Why go to South Africa because manufacturing is very cheap, or can go to other countries because clinical trials, you can do whatever you want almost. And then it have a value. So I think that I'm on a board of a company providing software technology for banks and trade companies like the e-banking solution. Yeah. And basically, I see more and more big trading companies trying to own the supply chain because they want to control and minimize risks and control timing and all that. And then in terms of ADR, in terms of balance, if you look at the chain and not in silos, I think the picture would be totally different in my opinion.
I don't disagree. I mean, again, I could have gone, there's so many different ways you could have taken that. Yeah. No, it's something that, again, it's something we could explore further. I think for the sake of this particular session, it was designed to be very high level, take a step back, look down. The area you're going to is quite a specific area in terms of value chain investments. Yes, I think that the picture would differ, not significantly, but I think it would differ markedly.
I'm also into venture capital, but it's all related. We have relationships with South Africa mainly, and skilled workforce is a very important point. Swiss companies, I'm based in Switzerland, and Swiss companies wanted to export and have their hubs down there. However, when they train people, these people leave and go to another company. So there's high attrition rates. So it's not very interesting for them. So they try to find ways from whatever incentives, and South Africa is pretty much stable. And we have other companies they are into financial services. They do, it's a startup, but they provide a software technology that does conditional payments. So basically, the diaspora send money down to their countries, and then the family can spend money on specific things. They have to work locally with people and train people. The technologies are coming from both sides of the world. What I try to say is, if you look at specific business cases or value chain or supply chain or whatever chain of services, I think everything is very useful.
We'll be getting into that
Yeah.
in one of the later sessions.
That's why I'm a bit puzzled by all
Sure.
the numbers.
So,
Okay. I mean, well, it was a pretty full-on in terms of the amount of numbers I was showing there, but that's part of the reason why I'm going to give this presentation to people afterwards. This is very much based on greenfield investment as a whole, so it's looking more at the investment by MNCs. The source of that information is primarily public releases, so again, you don't tend to get that level of detail that you're highlighting here necessarily covered off. But I think the points you're touching on are interesting, and we will be going into that throughout the afternoon.
great.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, David. We had introductions earlier, but could I have a show of hands? How many of you are responsible for actually finding companies with investment plans and trying to interact with them to get them to your location? Okay. Well, do you represent a location?
Well, I try to be holistic. I mean, I'm based in Switzerland, but I work with companies all over the world.
But I mean, this session is designed primarily for the investment promotion agencies. So I would say about 70% of you are really physically involved in finding companies, looking for companies, trying to find a way to get to those companies, to engage with the companies and convince them that wherever it is you represent, whether it's Tatarstan or a certain part of Malaysia, Malaysian state, or Macau is the right place for them. So the next few sessions are going to be dealing with the practical issues of how you do that. There are really three components to the session. The first one is, I'd like to just give you an overview of what some of your counterparts around the world are doing and some of the challenges that investment promotion agencies share. I said earlier that no matter where we're from, we share the same challenges, and I'd like to give you a sense of what these challenges are. And I'm sure you'll find that no matter where you're from, we're all of us here in the same boat. I'd then like to talk about, really, to your point, investment drivers. What is driving corporate investment? What are some of the factors today that are behind the numbers that David presented? Why are companies investing where they're investing? And then the third part of the session will be more about how we actually find companies and contact them. And then we'll make the link back to high-tech investment, because again, the topic of this session and also of the entire AIM forum is really on innovative high technology investment. So we'll look at that specifically. And we'll have a break in about 30 minutes or so. And hopefully most of you will come back. And if you do, then we'll continue on with the session. So let's talk about some of the challenges. You're aware of the challenges, and David outlined some of the numbers. I'd like to kind of break this down and think of it as market size. Now, if we think of us as competitors, what is it we're competing for? Most of you are competing for greenfield investment. In other words, what you're looking for are companies that have a mobile investment plan that they could implement in different countries. Okay? So they could put it into Tatarstan or another Russian republic, they could put it into Poland or the Czech Republic, they could put it in any Central African country, they could go to Malaysia or another country in ASEAN. That's the type of investment we're trying to attract. Now, according to UNCTAD and FDI Markets, in 2013, there were approximately 14,000 greenfield projects worldwide. So really, if you want to think of it that way, that's the market that all of you here are competing for. Now, how many investment promotion agencies are there in the world? Can anyone guess? Hundreds? 300? I'd say more than thousands. I mean, think of a country like France. So this is I'm based in Germany. France is our neighboring country. France has the Invest in France agency. France has 92 départements. Each département has their own agency. It has big city agencies, Paris, Lyon, Lille. France has the city agencies. France has agencies that span different regions. So in a country like France alone, there are about 120, maybe 150 agencies that are actively trying to promote their location. Think of every region in Russia. Think of each region in Poland that has an agency. Think of every US state and every big US city. My estimate, and there is no official number, nobody has ever actually calculated this, I would argue there are between 3,000 to 4,000 investment promotion agencies in the world. Agencies that are actively trying to promote their geographic area, whether it's a county, a city, a country, a region. Now if you divide 14,000 by 3,000 or by 4,000, you're not left with a lot of projects. So try and do the maths and think of your share. And I'm sure you all know, those of you who represent locations, how many projects you attracted last year. And think of whether you're getting more than your fair share or not. So the point of this slide is really, it's a really competitive market. If I was writing a business plan and thinking of getting into this market, as a country, I would say no way. It's too competitive. But you're all in it, you're all investment promotion agencies, and you're all here to compete. So let's talk a little bit about levels of competition. How do you all compete with one another? The first level of competition is global competition. Now, you may not think that many of you are in competition with one another. So Tatarstan would presumably, I would think, never be in competition with Saudi Arabia for a project. Tatarstan might not be in competition with one of the African countries for a project. Unlikely that you'll be competing on a project basis. However, there is one area which all of you are competing for globally, and that is awareness, attention. Really, you're all trying to get to the same companies, the same decision makers, and you're trying to grab their attention in some form or other, so that when they think of your country or your state or your region, they have a positive association. So that's global competition. It's really whatever you're doing to ensure that your target audience, corporate decision makers, associate you with positive things. Okay, so that when they think of your country, the association is a positive. You then have the regional competition. This is where African countries in Central Africa compete for the same project. This is where countries in Central and Eastern Europe compete for the same project. This is where countries in the United Arab Emirates or the Middle East compete for the same project. Okay, that's the level of competition I think we're all familiar with. This is where you're trying to win mobile projects. You then have very local competition, and this is cities within the same country, or even specific industrial parks. Just think of all the free zones here in the United Arab Emirates alone that are competing for investment. Okay, so these are different levels, and what I'd like to do now is give you some examples of how locations compete at these levels. At the very highest level, at the global level, locations are making bold claims. So countries are not afraid to make some pretty radical statements. Let's look at some examples. This is Michigan in the US, which has the perfect business climate. All of you have seen pictures recently of Detroit, blooming, flourishing city, yet Michigan claims they have the perfect business climate. Florida has the perfect climate for business. It's a little bit different. So both of them are perfect. Which one do you choose? Ontario has the world's most highly skilled workforce. So everybody else is stupid. Ontario, we're the smartest people in the world. They probably have some numbers to back this up. They're not showing the numbers. This is a claim they're making. Now you could argue, well, it's the North Americans, you know, that's the way they are, they exaggerate a little bit, but you've got Stockholm, Sweden, the reserved Swedes, who have said, we're the capital of Scandinavia. This is a slogan they came up with about 6 years ago. They still use it. They didn't ask Copenhagen, they didn't ask Oslo, they just said, we're the capital of Scandinavia. You've got North Rhine-Westphalia, which is a German state, where there's Düsseldorf, Cologne, very prosperous German state, who, for their slogan, used Germany at its best. Again, they didn't ask Bavaria, they didn't ask the other German states. This has actually caused some real tension between the states and Germany. But again, this is part of the global awareness raising. You've got Flanders. Does anyone know where Flanders is? It's the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. Flanders is Europe's best business location. They actually had a trademark on that slogan. Okay, so one of the reasons it's Europe's best business location is excellent infrastructure, connectivity, and market access. The only challenge is that the Netherlands is also Europe's best business location because they have excellent infrastructure, connectivity, and market access. So great ideas spread. And somehow they seem to be used exactly the same words. Here's a place, is anyone here from Macedonia? You're not from there, but you
No.
You have a facility there.
No, we're looking at it at one point.
Okay, well, you're going to the right place because Macedonia is business heavy. Okay? It's paradise. No tax, people work for free, 24 hours a day. It's an amazing place. Whether or not it's business heaven is not the point. The point is that Macedonia for the last 10 years has spent millions every year putting these ads in the Financial Times, in Business Week, everywhere in the world to create this awareness. Why are you looking at Macedonia? Is it because somehow you have an association with Macedonia?
I don't buy any of these. It's more driven by the region. Where do we need to be to serve the market, and then we just go for it.
Okay.
And if anything, that is putting me off more.
It's
than
counterproductive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's a very good point. Ask yourself, if you do have these types of budgets for promotion, is it really effective? I'll give you a few more examples. The UK are the leaders of marketing. So the UK has a campaign called the Great Campaign, which covers tourism, it covers really all aspects of British culture and business. Business is great, low tax, less regulation, talented workforce. This is a campaign that is everywhere. They have it in the New York subway, they have buses driving around New York occasionally with this campaign on it. This is the updated version with the Shard, the new skyline. The UK spends millions on branding. But it's not just the UK, it's Thailand. So Thailand, a few years ago, launched a campaign called Modern Thailand. The aim of this campaign was to position Thailand as a place for modern, efficient, high-tech industry. Okay? And as you can tell, Thailand, no traffic. Those of you who've been in Bangkok know. Picture was probably taken at 4 in the morning on a public holiday. But they spent millions on putting this campaign in place. It's a branding campaign. Has anyone here looked at Monocle magazine? Lifestyle magazine. They actually paid the people who do Monocle magazine to put this branding campaign together. Here's one that David just alluded to. This one was launched, I think, last November in India, or September. Make in India. Brand new by Prime Minister Modi. There is a strategy behind this to attract manufacturing to India, also to build domestic manufacturing in India. But a big component of it is branding. When you go back to your hotel room today, put on BBC World, put on CNN, you'll see this every 10 minutes. They're spending a lot of money on this. So that level of global awareness raising is expensive. It's expensive, and there are locations around the world that are really spending a lot of money on this. So think twice before you do this, because unless you have deep pockets, and we're talking tens or hundreds of millions, it's very hard to match these types of locations. Now, if we look a little, here's another one, by the way, Costa Rica, which has come up with an integrated brand, Esencial Costa Rica, which merges tourism. The trees are tourism. These things are industry. This guy is taking a break. But the idea is to merge tourism, culture, industry into one branding campaign, ideally to save money. In my opinion, the message gets lost a little bit. So let's go one level down. Let's look at the level of competition at a regional level. You mentioned incentives. I think incentives are essential. Again, I've been advising companies on corporate location for almost exactly 20 years. I've worked in most parts of the world. I've rarely worked on a project where a company has not at least considered incentives. I've worked on many projects where incentives have been the main driver, where companies have engaged us to find the location with the best or highest incentives package. And I've worked on many projects where they were not the main driver, but at the end of the project, when 2 or 3 sites were found that were really suitable from an operational perspective, the company placed a lot of emphasis on incentives. So the unspoken truth is companies want incentives. They expect them, they want them, they ask for them. Whether they need them or not is another issue, but they do want them. They're part of the market, they're part of the culture. In Asia, most of the incentives tend to be tax-driven. In Latin America, they tend to be tax-driven. In the US, there's a lot of cash that passes hands. So we could spend 3 hours talking about incentives. Incentives are important. Most places have them. I can think of 2 or 3 locations around the world that don't. This is Malaysia. I've only given an excerpt. If you go on MIDA, your National Investment Agency's website, there's a list of incentives that's endless. Everything is somehow exempted from tax. Very confusing because it takes you a while to really figure out, am I a strategic project? Am I an R&D? Am I this? Am I that? Kind of complex to find out where you fit in. Good for consultants because they can then advise you on where you fit in. The US, very aggressive, especially the southern states, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, increasingly Louisiana, have to all extents bought projects. So what they've done, South Carolina bought the BMW plant, they have a Boeing plant. Alabama has Mercedes, Alabama has Airbus. Airbus is building their first manufacturing facility in Alabama. Louisiana has big companies like Sasol from South Africa. So these companies are not going to South Carolina for the skills. Okay? They're going there because South Carolina is giving them big incentives packages. A big component of that is cash, direct cash grants. A lot of it is infrastructure investment. South Carolina will build the road, will give you the site leveled and graded with utilities in place. A lot of it is tax abatements, and a lot of it is actually workforce related. So Louisiana and the US will give you a workforce. IBM is putting a 500-person center in Louisiana. Louisiana has a program called Fast Start. IBM really just has to show up. Louisiana is building their building and is delivering them the workforce. So Louisiana is finding the people, screening the people, hiring the people, paying their salary initially, and putting them in the building that they're building for IBM. So incentives are important. But they're not only important in places like that. You might think in Europe, well, somewhere like Bulgaria has to give incentives, right? Why else would anyone go to Bulgaria? Which country in the world do you think, or in Europe, can you get the most incentives? Name a European country.
France.
France, anyone else? UK? It's actually Germany. Yes. So if you invest in the eastern part of Germany, you can get, in some cases, if you're a smaller company, up to 30% of your investment back in cash. So if you spend $100 million or euros or 10 million, the German government will give you 30% back in cash once you've spent the money on machinery, buildings, eligible expenditure. So that's a pretty generous incentives package. I don't want to spend too much time talking about incentives. My argument is really, you need to have incentives. If you don't, you need to be able to explain why. Or you need to be able to tell the company what you can do for them that is not a direct financial incentive. Because very often you might provide services as a government that you don't think of as incentives, but companies would perceive as an incentive. Okay, so it's not always about the money, it's about the support you can provide to help companies save time, be up and running more quickly, find the workforce, remove red tape. Those things are often equally important to the actual cash incentives or the tax incentives. Now, pretty much everyone is focusing on the same sectors. How many of you are trying to attract life science investment? Show of hands. Okay. Aerospace, anyone? No? Okay. Automotive? Okay. Let's take a look at aerospace. So this is Bavaria, Europe's leading aerospace region. It's not Toulouse, it's not Andalusia or Madrid, it's Bavaria. This is Karnataka Aerospace Hub of India. Singapore, Asia's aerospace hub. Now if the EDB says it, it has to be true. So Singapore is Asia's aerospace hub. Thailand emerges as a leading regional aerospace hub. And then a couple of years ago, Malaysia to develop Asia's first aerospace hub. And according to the chairman of MIDA, there is currently no country in Asia that can claim to be an aerospace hub. I guess he didn't tell Singapore or Thailand. So everyone is pretty much chasing the same sectors. And guess what? Everybody's going to the same places. How many of you put up your hands for life sciences? So biotech, pharmaceuticals. There's a big conference every year called the Bio Conference. It's the world's biggest biotechnology conference. Normally takes place in the US. And a lot of biotech companies attend, a lot of venture capitalists attend, but there are also a lot of locations that attend. This is the Bio Conference, and these were just some of the places that were there. Now I kind of stopped at halfway through the list, and you've got everywhere from Penang in Malaysia to Copenhagen, you've got Costa Rica, you've got Turkey, you've got Toulouse, you've got some parts of Spain. There are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of agencies there that are not there to promote their own companies, their biotech companies, but are there purely to attract investors. So competition is, again, extremely intense. And unless you can somehow stand out from the crowd, it's very difficult to go to a show like Bio and make an impact. Extremely difficult. Now, everybody's got the same messages. How many of you are from a location that has good infrastructure? And how many of you have a good geographic location? Maybe central? Yeah. Do any of you have skilled labor? And maybe a pro-business environment? Anybody? Yes? Okay. So you all have your 10, or some people have 8 reasons to invest in. Let's take a look at some of those, and let's try and guess who they are. I mean, let's face it, a lot of thought has flowed into this, so you should be able to guess from the 10 or 8 reasons who the locations are. So here's a place that has social and political stability. It has a growing economy, world-class infrastructure, FDI policies, government support and incentives, long-established and newly emerging industries, and it has a friendly and rich culture. Dubai. Any guesses? Where? Everywhere. Anything? Can you narrow that down a little bit?
UAE.
Macedonia. Any others?
US.
US. Thailand. Who said Thailand? Did someone say Thailand? Why did they say Thailand? Did you know it? Do you know that?
Friendly and rich culture.
Okay. Excellent. Good. Here's another one. Maybe you can guess this. Successful economy. This one has a population, which helps. There's a qualified and competitive labor force. It's centrally located, and it has a large domestic market.
India.
India.
Brazil.
Where?
Brazil.
Brazil. Who else?
China.
China. Any more guesses? Turkey. Close. We'll do a couple more. This one has security and political stability. It's got a unique and strategic location. It's not central, it's unique. It's got a sound macroeconomy, qualified, intelligent workforce. It's got a good life. Just good. Not excellent, just good. Where? Israel? Who else? Where, sorry? Switzerland, okay. Because they're modest, you mean? Is that one? This one is Jordan. And we'll do one more, excuse me. I could do these all afternoon, but we'll do one more. This one has economic strength, supportive government policies, an educated workforce, developed infrastructure, vibrant business environment, quality of life. Obvious. Germany. London. Nope, sorry. This one is Malaysia. Okay? So, again, I think you get the message. There's a reason why this is happening, by the way. It's not because marketing is not doing their job, because the people who put this together are generally the marketing people. The reason is, and I'll get to this in the later session that we're doing, so in the third part of this presentation, is that the target market is not clearly defined. If you define your target market as the corporate investor, well, yes, the corporate investor wants a central location. The corporate investor wants a pro-business government, and the corporate investor wants skilled workforce. But there is no such thing as the corporate investor, just as there isn't the consumer. The consumer wants high quality and low prices. That would mean all advertising you see on TV just says, buy our product, it's good and it's cheap. So this is about focus, and that's a word I'm going to be using very often this afternoon. It's about picking your target market and refining your messages to reach that target market. Now a few more things on this session, and again the first session is the one that is supposed to discourage you, and then after the break we will look at ways to address this and talk about really practically how you overcome some of these challenges. So let me summarize some of the challenges. Competition for projects is intense. Okay? David outlined the investment flows. No matter which part of the world you're in, competition is intense. If you had your fair share of projects, you would be winning 3 or 4 projects a year. Okay, so the competition is really, really strong. There are lots of location alternatives. When I started working in this field 20 years ago, very few companies were going to China. Certainly nobody was going to places like Colombia. Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary were really just starting to take off as investment locations. Nowadays I speak to companies that are setting up call centers in Madagascar. They're going to Guyana to set up BPO facilities. I mentioned Colombia. You're looking at Macedonia. Companies are going to places where they would never even have dreamed of setting up as recently as 10 to 15 years ago. So the number of alternatives is huge, and the number of agencies is also huge. Again, very good for us as consultants, not as good for you as locations who are competing. How many of you are from agencies that have been set up in the last 5 years? Okay, so, okay, 1. There are new agencies probably set up every month. We get contacted all the time from, we're a new agency from a Turkish region. We're a new agency from a city. We're a new agency from a county. So the proliferation of agencies has become immense. But guess what? Everybody's getting very good. So this is, on the one hand, good news. All of the agencies are getting much better at what they do. Again, when I started out in this, it was enough to have a nice brochure. Nobody had websites back then. So anyone who had a brochure and a booklet was already ahead of everybody else. Nowadays, the standards are phenomenal. The last time the World Bank did a benchmarking of agencies, the Global Investment Promotion Benchmarking, has anyone seen that? The last one is a few years old, it's 2012. Guess who the World Bank considered to be the best agency in the world? Nicaragua, right. Now you have Guatemala, who looked at what Nicaragua is doing. You've obviously read this, that's good. And Guatemala is catching up with what Nicaragua is doing. One of my favorite agencies, I think a best practice, is Bogota in Colombia. Whenever I meet with the agency in my city in Berlin, I tell them, you guys should do what Bogota is doing. They think I'm crazy, but I really mean it. So some of the best practices are being developed in places around the world. So agencies are getting better. What that means, though, it's a lot harder to differentiate yourself because you're all more or less doing the same things. You all have good websites. You all have good marketing materials. You're all more or less chasing the same sectors, and it gets harder to really get noticed. Information is widely available. Again, when I started off in this business, companies needed agencies to get data. They had to contact you because otherwise they wouldn't get information about your country or your city. Nowadays, they can get that from other sources. They can find it on the internet. They can get it from chambers of commerce. There are many other places for them to get it. They don't have to speak to you in many cases to get information. What they want from you is a lot more. And again, the last session of this afternoon will deal with what companies want. Companies don't just want you to provide them with data. They don't just want you to organize site visits. They want a lot more. They want, to sum it up, for you to be their business partner. They want you to help them be successful in the locations that you represent. And that's a change in the model, because agencies who are still out there thinking we're going to provide information, provide brochures, organize site visits, are falling behind. And we'll talk about, especially as related to high-tech investment, what it takes to become a business partner for companies. And again, lack of differentiation, we saw a few examples of that. So thank you for coming back. Now that you're here, I'm assuming you'll stay here. So for those of you who were here before the break, maybe it seems a little discouraging. Are some of these challenges familiar to you? Yes? I mean, I think these are, again, challenges that all of us face. What I'd like to do now is make it a little bit more positive and talk about ways around these challenges. So these are what I believe to be the success factors for foreign direct investment attraction. And again, I think these apply to everywhere in the world. I'll start with those, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into some of the more practical factors. How do you really do this on a day-to-day basis? Now, I think that the key factor for attracting investment is political support. What I mean by this is, do you have a government that really wants to attract FDI? All governments say they want to attract FDI. Every country in the world, without exception, has an investment promotion agency. North Korea has an investment promotion agency. Does North Korea really want to attract foreign direct investment? I'm not sure. I come from a country, Germany. We have a big investment promotion agency called Germany Trade and Invest, relatively well funded. Do we really want to attract investment? Is it an absolute priority for us? No. And I think that's reflected in our approach to foreign direct investment attraction. If you look at the agencies around the world that are routinely successful, that are known as best practices, whether it's the IDA Ireland or the Singapore EDB, they're agencies from countries where foreign direct investment attraction is a national priority. And this is reflected in everything they do. So think of your governor, your mayor, your prime minister, your president. Do you have their full and 100% support? Clear definition of goals. What is it we want to attract? We'll look in a minute about different types of FDI, but what are we trying to attract? Are we trying to attract infrastructure investors to take part in PPP projects to build our ports and roads? Are we trying to attract small, high-tech, innovative companies? Are we trying to attract big assembly projects that will generate a lot of jobs? Are we trying to attract energy-intensive projects because we're trying to sell electricity? Recently, there's a project in Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is the country that claims to have the lowest energy rates in the world. A lot of what they're trying to attract is energy-intensive because that's where they feel their strengths are. So what is it we're trying to attract? And as a next step, which sectors and markets are we trying to focus on? No agency, no matter how large, can afford to be active globally in all sectors. So this is about picking your target sectors and your markets. Are you going to be present in Western Europe, or are you going to, as David suggested, focus on investment from countries like China, where the number of outward investment or companies that are doing investments overseas is growing? So what are our markets? And when we've defined who we're going to get investment from, what are we going to tell them? When the companies that we meet with ask us, why should we invest in your location? What are the value propositions we're going to communicate with them? Can we, as an agency, provide something of value? This is often forgotten. When I look at IPA websites, I find a lot of good information about the location itself. I find all the things we looked at earlier, the central location, the high quality of the workforce, the great quality of life. Very rarely do I find something about the agency. And a lot of agencies forget that they are a selling point. As an agency, you are a value proposition. The services that you can provide, the support that you can provide companies, not the information, but the support, is a differentiator. So as an agency, can we provide something of value? Do we have the resources? I think if your politicians support you, they'll give you money. Is there anyone here from an agency that has recently had a budget increase? Good, we need to speak later. Is there anyone here from an agency that has recently had their budget decreased? Probably by default everybody else. Resources are important. You need money, you need people, you need to be active internationally. Strong partners. By partners I mean not just partners within the administration. They're important, other government entities, transportation ministries, workforce ministries, privatization ministries if you have them. But I'm referring especially to private sector partners, industry associations, very important private sector partners. Who are the other allies in your location who can help you attract investment? Extremely important. Integrated approach. Those of you who are from countries probably know the scenario. Malaysia has a strong national agency, several regional agencies, with Invest KL, a strong city agency. It has places like Iskandar who have their own promotion activities. You know the scenario, everybody's out in the market. How do you coordinate your activities so when you're out there, you're operating in an integrated way? My company represents the state of Virginia from the US. Virginia has about 20 regional groups who also have investment promotion agencies. Very often we go to trade shows, we don't even know they're there. We'll meet with a company that says, oh, I just got 3 business cards from someone in Virginia. It's not integrated. So integration is very important. Relevant performance measures. This is not about tracking how good you are or not. This is more about communicating the value of what you do to your stakeholders. When your government says, what about that money we gave you? What have you generated? What results have you generated? How do you communicate your success? And how do you communicate your success to the population at large in your countries or regions? How do you demonstrate to them that what you do is actually valued?
I think just on this point, sorry, Andreas, it's just this is mimicking the way that private sector organisations work. You are there, and the majority of you in the room as public sector organisations that are there to try and attract investment. What we're saying here is simply this is just exactly the same way a proper private sector organisation will work. It's about knowing your clients, knowing your market, doing your research, making sure that you've got your key messages in place, your key differentiation, making sure things are coordinated. The left hand needs to know what the right hand's doing. If you don't have that, you're going to struggle. Sorry, I just wanted to...
That's the thing. And a final one, and I think if you do all of these, and you do all of these well, you will be a great agency. I think there are some agencies that go beyond this and they become excellent agencies. And I think the one factor that differentiates the excellent from the great is the ability to actually shape the product. Most agencies consider their product, i.e. the location as a given. This is what we have, this is what we work with. Truly exceptional agencies actually shape their product, they make it better. They realize we have a deficiency in workforce, we'll address that. They realize that our infrastructure is not adequate. As an agency, we'll address that. So they fill the gaps. Again, your ability to do this depends very much on this. So these are the prerequisites. What I'd like to do now is focus on one of these individually. But before that, I want to talk about investment drivers. David gave you some trends. I've talked a little bit about how agencies compete.
In the previous slide, so you see, so this political support and strong partners. Timelines are, I would say, different for a politician and for other clients. How do you ensure that there is some synchronization between these agendas or hidden agendas of those people? Perhaps it's a bit a naive question, but...
Well, I think, yes. Well,
did you understand my question?
I understand the question, but having worked with literally hundreds of companies on site selection projects, I would actually argue that very often the private sector doesn't move faster than the public sector. I really have worked with a lot of companies, family-owned companies, big corporations, that certainly claim speed is important, and I've seen some of them move quickly, but I've worked on FDI projects that have taken years. So they've taken between the original idea to the selection of the location, 5-6 years. So I think it's important, as you said, that those timelines are in sync. But very often companies tend to move slowly too and have decision-making time frames that can get stuck. That would be my answer. Drivers. One of the, I think the keys to achieving this is to understand why companies invest. So why do companies actually bother? Why do companies make the effort of spending millions, tens of millions, to go to a country that they've never been to before, take into consideration risks? Why do they do that? And we'll go through some examples of drivers. Before that, what I wanted to do is together really talk about how we define investment. David mentioned the term greenfield investment earlier. In my mind, when I talk about foreign direct investment, for me it's greenfield investment. So for me it's companies that are planning to put new facilities in another place. A manufacturing plant, a distribution center, an R&D facility, a shared service center, call center. Two criteria: one, there's a physical asset involved, a building, an office, and secondly, jobs are created. So this is the classical definition of FDI. Now this is broadening. So I'd like to take you through some other types of FDI, maybe talk about how many of you share these definitions. Sales offices. How many of you would be happy if a company would set up a one-person sales office in your location? Is that something you'd consider to be FDI? No? I'll give you an example. When Google was still an unknown startup, they set up a two-person sales office in Zurich. That office now employs 2,000 people, has R&D, European headquarters. So sales offices don't have an immediate impact. They can be attractive, long-term. What about startups? How many of you are actively trying to attract startups? Okay, so you're a technology park, you're a venture capitalist, so there's an interest there. If you look at what Hong Kong is doing, Start Me Up their big campaign. Hong Kong is trying to, same way that Chile did before, actively trying to get startups, not just to open a presence, but to pack up and move from Europe, from the US, to Chile or to Hong Kong. Fully knowing that startups are risky, that the majority of them might go out of business. But they're willing to take that risk because they're trying to attract new technology. The Singapore EDB does this all the time. They bet on startups, new companies in unproven sectors. Singapore EDB wants to bring them because they believe it will have technological impact on Singapore. M&A, how many of you support acquisitions? Acquisitions of your companies by foreign companies. Okay? This is a huge issue. If you're trying to attract Chinese investment, the majority of Chinese investment occurs through acquisitions. When you look at Chinese companies going to the US or Western Europe, in most cases they'll do that by acquiring a company. So if you're serious about attracting Chinese investment, then M&A becomes an option to consider. If you look at best practice agencies like Czech Invest, they're very active in attracting, or at least trying to attract, acquisitions of Czech companies.
Sorry, just on that note as well, I think it's also important as time evolves and your location becomes more developed. London and Partners, I think as well, they have a very different perspective where they're trying to not just attract jobs, but to retain jobs as well. So there's also that element of it as well, as you can come further down the line.
No.
But if I may say so, the majority of investment is not only greenfield investment, it's actually mergers and acquisitions. So I think a lot of countries don't realize it's not only running after new investments, it's really utilizing the investments which are already existing in your own locations, and it's reinvested earnings. It's those same investors, what kind of profits that they're making, that they reinvest in. And when you look at the FDI data, that's the majority, the bulk of FDI comes from that part.
That's true. I just got here from Australia. 70%, 70, of Australia's investment is reinvested. So it's a huge amount. In certain Western European countries, the UK, France, Germany, it's between 50 to 60%. How many of you would like to attract investment from sovereign wealth funds? Yes? Okay, that's good. So if a sovereign wealth fund came and said we want to invest in your infrastructure, how many of you are trying to attract infrastructure investment? Ports, roads, schools, hospitals. So again, this is a big part of the puzzle. Real estate. How many of you would accept an investor coming in purely to develop a real estate project?
Maybe just a piece of information, Andreas. Concerning sovereign wealth funds, I have good news. There is a huge, quite a significant area in the exhibition hall for investors zone. And that we have Mubadala, which is the biggest sovereign wealth fund in Dubai, who is present. We have Masdar, and others, one of the biggest in the world, sovereign wealth fund, which is the Abu Dhabi investment fund. They are willing to take, to make appointments. They're not present, but if you approach one of the members of the organizing committee, you can line up a meeting with the people from the Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth fund. So just it's for your information.
You can do that after this session. Don't leave now.
They're running out the door already.
Exactly. They're not here until tomorrow. So,
Having said that, I must say, sovereign wealth funds have done very little FDI.
they have, but they can be a big source.
Yeah.
Real estate, so some of you said real estate. So if an investor were to approach and said, we want to redevelop some of your buildings, would you consider that? I see a few heads nodding. Tourism, hotels, resorts. Retail, what if H&M said we want to build or set up a big shop? I was recently in Australia, in Melbourne. One of what they count as their biggest investment project is actually H&M. They helped H&M set up a store in downtown Melbourne, which created about 30 jobs. They found them a prime property. For them, that was a big investment project. JVs, would any of you support a joint venture between a foreign company and a local company? Okay. Research collaborations. What if Tata Consultancy Services from India or Tech Mahindra from India said, we want to start a collaboration with one of your universities. We're not going to set up. All we're going to do is send some scientists over and collaborate on research. Would you consider that to be FDI? Yeah, see, don't see many heads nodding. What about testing? If someone said, we'd like to come and test some technology in your country, maybe it's technology related to energy, or maybe it's technology related to raw materials. We just really want to test to see if it works. So I see less heads nodding.
Question, when you have the research collaborations, when you do that, like, do you still own your intellectual property if you join in, like the university? Or?
Depends on the deal. I mean, most universities will let the company own the intellectual property. A few universities will want a piece of that, but generally, if it's industry, academia, industry pays, industry owns the intellectual property.
Patent, too?
Yes.
I just want to chime in and tell her that there's an experience. I used to work for New York State.
Okay.
In Albany, the Nano Center, it's a major joint venture that the government, the state of New York has spent, I believe, about $4.2 billion over 10 years. So essentially, it's almost an incubator where you have major corporations coming. They can't individually pay for the capital investment that is required to do the research. So the state does that, and so whatever comes out of in terms of research, that can actually lead to industrial or manufacturing process, they share in the return with the state. It's almost like it's a royalty type.
Yeah. That's a good example. Maybe we can pick up on that later, because I think it's a good way to attract high-tech investment. The key question here is really what's your priority? What is your government told you that you're there to do? Are you there to create a lot of jobs? Are you there to sell land? Are you there to bring technology in? And those strategic priorities will determine what is FDI or not. The trend is really, the definition is broadening. It used to be pure greenfield investment. There are agencies now who will consider all of these types of investment. What I'd like to do now is just quickly, and this might seem a bit basic to you, but I'd like to run through a few reasons why companies invest. And the point of this is not to look a bit uncomfortable there in the corner. Okay. The point is not to have a basic question and answer on why companies invest. The point of this is to understand investment drivers. Why do companies invest? Because as we'll see later, that will help you find and attract investors. So one of them is growth. Companies need to grow. You might ask yourself, why do they have to grow? I gave this similar presentation, somebody said, it's because companies are greedy. That's a philosophical question. Companies are compelled to grow. If companies are publicly listed on the stock market, their investors expect growth. If companies don't grow, they'll be punished. And privately held companies expect increasing returns. So companies are compelled to grow internationally. One of the ways they do that is by accessing new geographic markets. We think of European or American companies going to China. Chinese companies are active in one of the world's most competitive markets. So if you're a Chinese automotive company, or if you're a Chinese company that makes wind equipment generation, you're in one of the world's most competitive markets. It pays you to go overseas to look for new opportunities. To supply key clients, this is very often the case in automotive or aerospace. If your key client is Toyota or Hyundai, Hyundai opens a factory in Brazil, Hyundai will expect their top suppliers to be there. To provide better service, this is simply a matter of being close to customers, providing a service in the local language. We are just about to start a project helping a German retailer set up a shared service center, actually more of a customer service center in Central and Eastern Europe. The fact is they've opened stores everywhere in Central and Eastern Europe. They need people who can provide customer service on the phone in Hungarian, Czech, Polish, and other Eastern and Central and Eastern European languages. So that's customer service. Tariffs. We often think we live in a world of free trade. Tariffs still play a big role. Russia, is a classic example here. The reason Russia has an automotive industry is tariffs. It's very difficult to export cars to Russia because the tariffs are huge. Hence, every automotive manufacturer has built a factory in Russia. To avoid restrictive home country regulations, again, I come from a country, Germany, that has quite a few regulations. One of them is online gaming. So I can play online poker, but I can't start a company in Germany that provides online poker or gambling. A lot of the companies have moved to a small country in the Mediterranean called Malta, because Malta has very favorable regulations for online gaming. So this is an example where regulations play a role. Regulatory approvals, if I'm a pharmaceutical company and I'd like to sell in Europe, I need a CE mark. If I'm a pharmaceutical company and I want to sell in the US or I make medical devices, I need FDA approval. Hence I need to be there to get those approvals. Offset deals, we'll talk more about those. These are still huge. So if a government is buying any type of equipment from a foreign company, they're buying military equipment, they're buying equipment related to infrastructure, very often there's an offset component. In other words, some of that equipment will have to be made locally. And I'll give you an example in the next session of how you can use that to attract innovation and R&D related investment. Reduce costs. Costs are still a big issue. Transportation costs, labor costs. Tax. I spent 13 years working for one of the big 4 accounting firms. I was in their tax practice, and we routinely would work with big companies, look at their global footprint. So where's your headquarters? Where's your research? Where do you source things from? And we'd rearrange those boxes to optimize tax. Right? It might seem like a theoretical exercise, but really, every time you move a box from A to B, you're moving people, you're moving assets. The same applies to supply chains. You mentioned this. Companies are routinely looking at the supply chains. Where are we sourcing products from? Where do our raw materials come from? Where do we add value in that supply chain? And they're routinely reorganizing that, which leads to relocations of activities. Raw materials, I'll give you a few examples, are becoming increasingly important, whether it's wood, gas, sand. Raw materials are something that a lot of industries need, that are a big driver of investment. Risk. Look at Japanese companies who had most of their assets in Japan. They realized that that was kind of risky and have moved or are moving a lot of things to Southeast Asia. I'm aware of a German company that had manufacturing plants in the eastern Ukraine and in Egypt. They had some pretty significant supply chain disruptions over the last couple of years. They're in the process of trying to spread their risk. So risk plays a big role. Technology, which will be the focus of what we speak about later, trying to tap into new sources of technology, trying to tap into innovation. Skills and know-how is related to that. Skills are in short supply. One of the companies I've worked with is a company called ARM. They are a semiconductor design company from Cambridge, UK. They have a policy of looking around the world to try and find new sources of microelectronic skills. And they will set up a presence in places that provide those skills. So a lot of different categories. Again, why are these up here? One of the most important things for me is every time you interact with a company, try and understand the drivers. Why is the company investing? Why are they thinking of investing? What is driving their investment? Because that will allow you to respond in a manner that is more useful. And that will also allow you to tailor your messages from the very generic messages we heard before the break to something that's more compelling for the company. I'd like to give you a few examples of drivers that you can put into different categories. You can call them operational. Some of these we looked at: raw material access, know-how. So these are things that improve a company's efficiency or operations. You've got market-based drivers. We talked about some of these being close to customers, being in markets that are growing quickly. Financial drivers, primarily cost reduction. Exchange rates factor in here too. Exchange rates play a big role. Regulatory, approvals, trade barriers. So it's nice to put them in buckets. The reality is a lot of these are related. Okay, so if I'm looking for tapping into specialized skills and know-how, I might want to couple that with cost reduction. So I might want to go to countries where costs are a little bit lower, labor costs. I can do both. I can get skills and reduce my costs. If I'm following a customer into a certain market, well, that might help me become more efficient. So a lot of these are interrelated, but there's always a primary driver. There's always a key reason why. Let's make this a little bit more practical, and let's use a few examples. I'll skip over this page very quickly, except, well, actually, maybe a few points I want to make here. This is essential because understanding the drivers helps you find investors. Once you've found them, it helps you understand why they're doing what they're doing. And thirdly, it helps you engage with them. The more you know about why they're choosing to invest or thinking of investing, the better you're positioned to help. Few examples, market opportunities. Everybody knows China's a growing market. Okay? So China's growing rapidly, economic growth has slowed down a little bit to just 7%. It's still a growing market. Is that a driver for everyone? No. China has a market that in some sectors is actually declining. In other sectors it's growing very rapidly. Here's an example. China's growing EV, that's electric vehicle market, is driving investment in batteries. So battery manufacturers, a lot of them from Korea, Samsung, LG, Foxconn from Taiwan, are setting up factories in Russia. In China, excuse me. The driver here, China's market for electric vehicles is growing. The battery manufacturers have to be there. So we've got two drivers. We've got market growth and customer proximity. Another example, David alluded to this earlier. In the United States, gas prices are at all-time lows. Natural gas is very cheap, and anybody who uses natural gas or derivatives of natural gas in the petrochemical industry or the chemical industry or the packaging industry is going to the US. So a lot of European companies, German companies in particular, are going to the US to take advantage of this low-cost gas. So we have a clear driver here, energy and feedstock costs. This is Louisiana. This is an interesting example. It's actually the US. We have a policy in Europe that the European Union wants a lot of our energy to come from renewable sources, wind energy, solar energy. A renewable source is actually wood pellets. Does everyone know what a wood pellet is? Actually, a little pellet, looks like a tablet, that's made from wood that's cut down, chopped to pieces, and compressed into a pellet. Gets put in an oven and gets burnt. Okay? We have a problem in Europe. We don't have a lot of wood. Okay? Or the wood that we do have can't be cut down. So dozens of European companies have gone to the US and have set up factories in the US, in Louisiana, North Carolina, Virginia, Texas, because they have access to Mississippi, they have access to wood. They chop the wood down, make the pellets, and ship them all back to Europe. So here we have two drivers combined. A regulation in Europe to increase energy from renewable sources, and availability of resources in the US. Mexico has become the place to go for the automotive industry. Audi is building a new plant there. A few other companies have announced that they're planning to build new plants there. Nissan is building a new plant. Kia is building a new plant. These are big greenfield investments. Why would you think these companies are going to Mexico and not to the US?
Costs, job costs, labor costs.
Labor costs. So that tends to be the key driver, but it's not just labor costs.
But it also shortens the value chain. The market in the US is also an important thing, etc. You have a lot of several advantages of having investing in Mexico in the other way.
Yep, it's not just labor costs. Tax. One of the key drivers is free trade agreements. Mexico has more free trade agreements than any country in the world. So if I'm Audi and I build a factory, and an automotive factory produces about 250,000 cars a year, I'll never sell all of those in the US. If I go to Mexico, Mexico has a free trade agreement with the European Union. It has NAFTA with Canada and the US. It has a free trade agreement with ASEAN. It has a free trade agreement. It's part of, it has a link with Mercosur. It's part of the Pacific Alliance, Colombia and other countries down there. So if I'm Audi and I go to Mexico, I can use that factory to supply my cars everywhere in the world. It helps that labor costs are low, but that's not the primary driver. Here's one that we've capitalized on recently. The Swiss used to keep their currency artificially strong, and they abandoned that policy a couple of months ago. So the Swiss franc changed in value by about 20 to 25% overnight. Swiss companies that are based in Switzerland and don't have manufacturing in the Eurozone all of a sudden have lost cost competitiveness. A lot of them are scrambling to set up facilities in Europe. We're actually helping a few German locations contact Swiss companies. Literally the day after this happened, we started calling Swiss companies. Okay, so here's an example of a driver, in this case currency, that occurred quickly that creates a once-off or one-off opportunity that you can capitalize on. So what I'm urging you to do is try and understand which drivers might trigger investment to your locations. What is it that you have that could match one of these drivers? You have certain talents or skills that are unique. You have certain resources that are unique. What is it that you have that matches these? Here's talent. You can't read this. This is cybersecurity. Everybody's worried about cybersecurity. Everybody's spying on everyone. Well, there's a shortage of cybersecurity specialists, IT specialists in cybersecurity, everywhere. You can't find them in the US, you can't find them in the UK. Very hard to get your hands on these people. It's probably 10 to 12 times harder to find cybersecurity professionals than it is to find general IT professionals. Very difficult to get these people. Lockheed Martin, I just came back from Canberra in Australia, has well, they've got a cybersecurity center in Canberra. They're just opening a second one in Melbourne. Why? Two drivers. One is they can find skills. Secondly, they've also got contracts with the Australian government. So again, you've got these two drivers, a business opportunity coupled with skills. This looks a bit theoretical, so let me pause here and see if there are any questions before we get into the next slide. Comments? David, you disagree? No?
Large part, no, I'm pretty accurate. And I think the reasons for that is a lot of what we're doing here is, fail to prepare is prepare to fail. It's that simple. So you understand everything, understand the dynamics of what you're actually going to the market for, you're much likely to have much better return. It's really mimicking the way private sector works. You are there to serve the needs of the private sector. You need to understand what drives their businesses in order for you to be able to provide a service to them. So I think you can't really disagree with it because it's reality. It's what they need to do.
So that, exactly. So,
Yeah, just a comment. I thought that was a very interesting line because I've always argued that, at least as I understand it, that promotion agencies are public entities that are servicing private sector. And so to do that, you really have to think like they think. And so, and that's, certainly is, it's not easy as it can be, perceived. So, but I think that's one of the challenges that as a public agency, investment promotion agency that I believe face. The other issue, I think in terms of the targeting, we talked about it earlier. I believe also that it is very important to leverage certain companies' presence. What I mean by that is there is one, it's almost like the cluster theory type of, if you go after a certain type of industry, some others will come. Because if you get, I don't know, let's think about an hedge fund, for instance. Investing in Africa could be very challenging. So if you get an hedge fund in the commodity business to come into your neck of the wood, others will follow because they said, oh, well, it got, now it's gone. It got Lehman Brothers, or it got whatever. So, I think that's also could be saving you money, the investment promotion agencies. If you go after certain specific entities who might actually be a catch, or I don't know what
it's
it's
perception. Perception is
Yes.
a massive thing. I think that's a really key point to make there. I mean, again, with all due respect to Saudi Arabia, you guys, the government have done a fantastic job in terms of getting on the rankings, being very successful in terms of being the best place in the world to do business and so on. It's done fantastic by that. The investment hasn't necessarily followed through. Having said that, though, those companies that do go in there, like the Eli Lillys and so on, they're expanding massively within King Abdullah Economic City. So I think you're right. It's getting a couple of those anchor investors in will then spread out and resonate, and then that will help draw in other people. Similarly, I think in terms of Microsoft, they always used to say one job invested by Microsoft would create 30 indirect jobs in that economy as well. So there's two sides of it. It's not just bringing that anchor investor in, the one that's going to create that excitement, but also then the strategic ones that can really have a bigger impact on, on the local economy.
Yeah, in what extent most subjective drivers can be
Subjective.
yes, like for example, you can have two presidents that come along fine between each other, and they try to promote investment through two countries, for example, or you can have, or as a company, you have a friend you have a friend in Jordan, and then you think Jordan might be a good place to invest.
I'll answer that in two goes. I'll answer the first part in a second. The second part helps, again, I just was doing some work with Invest Victoria in Australia. They landed a big project by an Indian company called Aegis, BPO company, 700 jobs. Turns out the guy at Invest Victoria went to business school with the head of Aegis. So, but these are very rare occurrences. You can't base your whole strategy on relationships and luck. If you have them, great, but I wouldn't recommend that you base everything on that. And I'll answer the first part in a minute.
I think in the long list you have a choice. Very good list. I would have spent that sometimes there is a kind of misunderstanding or misexpectations about what the corporation wants or what the state or agency can do for corporations or even universities. I think that's important to be able to bridge, to have bridges between all these islands and these ecosystems. Sure. Otherwise, people are talking without really understanding what's the common language. And I think that's, to me, one of the most important parts when negotiation and empathy. That's essential.
I agree, and we'll look at some examples of why that's important. But let's go a little bit deeper. Let's try and think the way an investor thinks. Okay, so let's try and understand how a company makes investment decisions. In very simple terms, there are 4 levels to this. The first one is global. So this applies to companies of all sizes. If you're a GE, General Electric, you have a board meeting, and the board of GE sits around and talks about how they're going to allocate resources in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, in terms of technologies that they're going to invest in terms of geographic regions they might be active in, and they develop a strategy. I'll give you an example of this. A competitor of GE's. So this is Siemens. This is their new strategy. Originally it's called Strategy Vision 2020. I didn't steal this from Siemens boardroom. I downloaded this off the internet. And this tells you what Siemens is going to be doing, where they're going to allocate resources in the next 5 years. It's got to be important.
I'm challenged by this technology.
But, so this tells you, Siemens is telling you publicly which sectors, what types of technology they're going to be investing in. Okay? One of them is efficient urban mobility. Okay? So Siemens has told you publicly that efficient urban mobility is important to them. So the second level is, once they've defined that, what areas of activity are they going to invest in? This is not so much about countries yet or regions. This is really within these broadly defined strategic areas, specifically what activities are we going to conduct. Okay? And this applies, by the way, to companies of all sizes. If I'm a startup company, say I'm a Finnish company that develops mobile apps, and I've done very well in Finland, and I might have done well in other Scandinavian countries, what do I do next? Do I go to the UK? Do I go to the US? Do I go to Asia? Because there's a strong market for my services, or there's a population that could appreciate my service in Korea or in Japan. Do I go to Latin America? The same applies to companies of all sizes. So the next thing Siemens does is they talk about activities. So we talked about urban mobility. The next thing they do is define that. So Siemens says, this is what we're going to do in urban mobility. We're going to be active in regional and high-speed trains. We're going to look at locomotives. We're going to do things in intelligent transportation, so intelligent parking systems, toll systems. This is what we mean by intelligent transportation. This is what we mean by urban mobility. Notice they haven't said anything about regions, cities. That doesn't come into this yet. The third thing, or the third level, is then the choice of entry mode. Once we've made this decision, how are we going to be active around the world? Are we going to buy companies? We want to be active in rail. Do we buy companies that have certain technologies? Do we set up offices overseas? How do we become physically active? That's when companies start to think of locations. So before that, they haven't thought of locations. This is where they start to think of regions, countries, cities. And at that point, we generally get what we're all familiar with, which is a project. They've decided we need a plant, an office, a research center somewhere in the world. And this is where we compete. And this is where, back to your point, some of those softer factors play a role. Who do I know? Where are my relationships? Everything else is strategic. Now, you may meet a company that is at this point of their decision making. You might be disappointed because they don't have a project. They're not going to contribute to your short-term results. I would argue it's much better to be up here than too late. Because up here, you can actually work with the company to shape their decision. Down here is where Siemens then decides where are we going to be. And Siemens, in this urban mobility sector, is actually everywhere. There are places you would expect, Germany, the UK, but guess what? They're in India, they're in Bangkok, they have 4 locations in Russia, they're in Bratislava, they have 2 in Australia. Why? Because that's where they found opportunities. And that's where their drivers led them to go. And we'll look at what some of those drivers could be in a minute. So, any questions at this stage? Okay, this is the final module. It's going to get a little bit more practical. Not to say technical, but definitely practical. Attracting high-value investment. Now, we talked earlier about focus, the need for focus. Picking target sectors. I think a few of you mentioned it already. Moving from aerospace to specific parts of aerospace. I'm a huge believer in that. I think focus is essential in foreign direct investment attraction. Take an area such as renewable energy. What is that? We talked about wood pellets. It's solar power. If it's solar, what is it? Is it photovoltaic or is it thermosolar, concentrated solar power? Is it geothermal? Is it wave energy? Is it wind, offshore or onshore? I mean, the term renewable energy is meaningless. So the need to focus is essential. Take the automotive industry. We're an automotive location. For what? For wire harnesses, like Egypt or Tunisia, or for new mobility concepts that are going to Silicon Valley. So an industry term in itself can include lots of different things. And I think it's very important to pick the right target sectors. And a target sector is one where, quite simply, there's more potential for you to attract investment. That's why you pick target sectors. It's one where you have real selling points. It's not one where, let's put it differently, it's one where you say more than we have a central geographic location. It's one where you say something specific that resonates with the company. If you pick target sectors, you're more likely to understand the drivers. Again, the business drivers. Once you have a target sector, you can really get into the mindset of companies in that sector. You can develop very clear messages. And what it gives you, and I think this is a key attribute, it gives you credibility. So when you're meeting with that company, they realize you're serious. They realize you've made an effort to understand how their business works. And that separates you from all the other agencies who come in with, these are the 10 reasons you should invest in. You're credible. So these are key points. Target sectors should be narrow, but they shouldn't be so narrow that you're left with one company. Okay? So there's a technique to developing them that allows you to get a big enough pool of companies. And the thing I always hear is, well, if we pick sectors, what if we get an investor from another sector? Well, you're not saying no to everybody else. This is all about how you use your time and resources, how you use your money, your budgets, the time of your staff, your own personal time. It's about focus. I'll give you a few examples. How many of you are chemical industry location? Nobody, okay? Oh, life sciences. Well, we talked about life sciences. You can break that down into pharma, biotech, medical devices, and healthcare services. If you look at medical devices, it's everything from high technology devices that are currently being developed, mobile health devices that consistently track your health, to test tubes, hospital beds, really low value type things. Very different. You can go a step further. Let's say you're a biotechnology location. You've got different parts of biotechnology you can be active in. Let's say you pick on diagnostics and bioinformatics, you go a step further. And all of a sudden, you realize that you started off with the life sciences, and you're now in IT, because a lot of this is about crunching large numbers of data.
Yes.
Genome data. It's about data centers.
Security as well.
Security, exactly. So you started off as a life science location, telling companies about your PhD scientists and doctors and hospitals, whereas actually the companies you want to attract are more interested in energy costs, data center sites, IT specialists. So very important, you can do this in chemicals. Chemicals very simply can be split into two groups, commodity and specialty. Everybody used to think the commodities were going to be in Asia or here in this region, and the specialties were going to be somewhere else. Now the commodities are back in the US, and guess what sector attracted the most investment in the US last year within chemicals? Fertilizers. Okay? So last year there were about 12 fertilizer investment announcements. Fertilizer is one of the most basic industries there is. You can split this, you can go into chemicals, look at all kinds of other things. You can split that by applications, and all of a sudden, again, you're somewhere completely different. And this works for high tech as well. Here's a buzzword you hear a lot: smart city. Kazan is a smart city, right? So Kazan, smart city. Amsterdam's a smart city. Copenhagen's a smart city. Dubai is a smart city. Presumably Abu Dhabi as well. Lots of smart cities in the world. Does anyone know what that means? I have no idea. Well, I do now because I read up, but before I had no idea what this means. Apparently it means a lot of different things. It means smart buildings, smart healthcare, smart transportation, smart infrastructure, lots of smart stuff. Okay? So you want to dig a little bit deeper. You look at smart transportation, and this means traffic infrastructure, so it actually means building roads, bridges, it means building bus lanes, it means intelligent transportation systems, so systems that monitor parking spaces, or that channel transport efficiently. It means e-mobility. If you look at e-mobility, all of a sudden you're talking about batteries, cars. So you started off being a smart city, but actually you're attracting dirty battery manufacturers, big polluting industries. Is that really smart? So again, it pays to be focused, because what a battery manufacturer needs is very different from what someone in these other sectors might need. So this is an exercise you should go through. We will send you these slides, but it involves two components. It involves looking at what you have. What are we good at? Where do we have resources? But then it involves a very honest assessment of who cares? Does anyone really need what we have? Right. Is there a group of companies that are actually investing globally that need what we can offer as a location? And if not, should we change what we're offering? Should we change the sectors we're competing on? Should we address the shortcomings that we might have? It's then a matching and a picking of target sectors. Sounds simple. In practice, this is very difficult to do. It's also difficult to do because sometimes you don't make the choice. The government tells you what you should be focusing on. The government says, you must attract investment in infrastructure. You must attract investment in ICT. And it's very hard for you to say to the government, we're not really that competitive in a particular industry. So that is definitely a challenge. Let me give you a few examples of locations that have tried to do this. This is New Zealand. New Zealand is trying to attract infrastructure investment. Why? Because they had an earthquake. and one of the cities, Christchurch, was pretty much flattened. So they're planning to spend at least 40 billion New Zealand dollars on infrastructure. So this is their value proposition. Their value proposition is, come to New Zealand, there are business opportunities here for companies that make construction equipment, companies that build things. There's business here. This is Scotland. Scotland is trying to attract R&D in life sciences. Their value proposition is top talent, universities, research collaborations. Come here, tap into specific knowledge. Here's Denmark. Denmark is saying, well, we're expensive, people aren't going to produce here. What can people really do here? Testing things. We're a very open society, relatively small society, very open to new technologies. So come here and test things. Test new IT concepts, test smart city concepts. Come and test the stuff here. You might like it and stay. Now, I think these are all good value propositions. So these locations, New Zealand, Scotland, Denmark, have thought about what they want to do. So they haven't said, come here and invest in ICT. They've actually made an effort to be more focused. But I would argue from a company's perspective, this is still way too abstract. Okay? Let me tell you what I mean. So if I'm a construction company, and I look at this, well, 40 billion required for the Christchurch rebuild. How do I get that money? Are there contracts? Are there tenders? Are those tenders at the federal level, at the city level? Are those tenders open to everyone? Can I bid as a foreign company, or do I have to partner with a local company? When is that process open? What are my chances of winning? How big are the tenders individually? The number itself is pretty meaningless. Lots of places around the world throw big numbers around. If I'm an IT company, and I look at this, top talent, great. What kind of talent? What does that mean? How many people do you have? What skills do they have? Can I actually get those people? Or are they being scooped up by everybody else? Do they graduate from the universities here and all move to London? What does it mean, top talent? What does research collaboration mean? How does it work in practice? If I look at this, testing, again, what does that mean? How do I test my products? In what environment? How much will it cost me? What do I get as a result of that?
You can call it.
Yeah, you can call Henrik and ask him. Henrik probably wouldn't know, actually.
But the good thing is, at least he's got a face and a name and a telephone number.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised again how many IPAs just have a contact form. It's not good.
So Henrik is there. Henrik might be able to tell you. The fact is, it's quite complex to do this. So most of these propositions are abstract. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because, again, this session is about high-tech investment. Okay? We're really trying to focus on innovative investment. They're very abstract. They don't mean much to an investor. They're not practical. They don't address the investor's drivers. So the value you provide has to be specific to a driver. Most IPAs, as we said, they simply try and show that there's value, but they don't break it down. Excellent IPAs can create value. Remember what I said earlier about shaping the product? The same goes for creating value. For me, this is the black belt of investment approach. This is where you create an opportunity for a company that wasn't there before. This is not where you go to a company and say, do you have a project? Yes? Well, let me tell you why my location is there. This is where you go to a company and say, what are your investment drivers? And then go away and come back to the company and say, I've thought about your investment drivers and I have an opportunity. So this is a lot different from what most IPAs do, and it's very important for innovative sectors, for anything in science, R&D related investment. Some of the factors to this is asking the company what they want. What would make you come to our location? So when you meet with Microsoft, or you meet with an innovative life science company, ask them. Don't ask them, do you have a project that we can compete for? Ask them, what would it take for you to invest in our location? What could we do to make you invest? Companies will tell you. assess whether that's even feasible. Don't tell them, sure, we can handle that. Go back home and figure out whether that's even feasible. Most companies will tell you, if you get a business opportunity for us, we'll invest in your location. So if you help us sell products to your government, we'll invest. Maybe it's possible. Maybe you can help them do that. Make sure that the value proposition is really stable. Introduce them to the right players in your location and follow through. And I want to give you a few examples of where this is important. This is Bogota, again, one of my favorite cities. Bogota, Colombia. Colombia a few years ago associated with lots of negative things. Colombia is also a very innovative place, and Bogota for at least a decade has had a very innovative transportation system, or an approach to public transportation. So they pioneered electric buses. They actually pioneered intelligent transportation, a bus system that is actually highly efficient, that takes congestion off the streets, that reduces pollution. It's an intelligent mobility system. So they pioneered this. What this created was business opportunities. They created a place to test things. They also created a business opportunity because the city buys electric buses. The city buys electric buses. Fantastic business opportunity. The third thing they did is they told people about it. They ran and organized conferences in Bogota on this topic. The mayor of Bogota is on every panel you can imagine around the world when it comes to transportation systems. He's a guru. So everywhere in the world he talks about what I did in Bogota and why we're the best and where we're the... Everybody knows Bogota. The result is a Chinese company that just announced that they're not just selling buses to the government of Bogota, they're going to manufacture them there. So there's an example of where Bogota created a value proposition. They didn't say we're a great location and we have a good quality of life. They created a value proposition. A great place to test, develop, produce intelligent transportation systems, e-mobility. Another example, again, I just learned this last week. I was in Canberra. Canberra is the capital of Australia. It's part of the Australian Capital Territory. It's a small state. They have so-called renewable energy auctions. Do any of you have those? Are any of you trying to sell renewable energy? So let me explain what this means. Is they actually have auctions where providers of wind power can bid for the right to sell wind energy to their government. Okay. So they recently had an auction, and they said whoever wins this auction will get a contract to sell us wind energy for the next 20 years. Fantastic opportunity. So you had companies from around the world bidding for this right. They could have stopped there. They could have said, you won the auction, congratulations, now you can sell us wind energy. What they did, remember I mentioned offset contracts, they stipulated that whoever wins this bid has to create technology. So the winner of this bid, which was a French company called Neoen, has now committed to investing millions into a renewable energy skills center of excellence. So they're actually going to build up a center of excellence together with the university to create skills in renewable energy. So what seemingly was a pure market opportunity was turned into technology investment attraction. So this is an example of a good way to link it. I'm going to show you one of my favorite examples. This is a client of ours. We work extremely closely with them. You might argue this is not comparable. This is Copenhagen. I think this can be replicated everywhere. Copenhagen Capacity is the investment promotion agency for the Copenhagen metropolitan area. About 70 people in the agency. This is the way they're structured. They have investment promotion. So that's marketing, sales. But look at the other areas they have. Talent and cluster development. Why do they have those? Because they've realized that what they're trying to attract is driven by the search for talent. Copenhagen isn't trying to attract manufacturing plants. They're trying to attract high technology, innovative investment. So within their agency, they have a group that fosters talent. They also create clusters. They create their own cluster organization. You had mentioned clusters. They don't do that for fun. They do that because clusters create investment opportunities. And I'll end with one example. This is a case study that we prepared with Copenhagen to illustrate some of these points. Copenhagen is also a smart city. Okay, so they're a smart city. At the end of 2012, they were doing some research. They came across an article that Cisco, probably most of you have heard of Cisco, big US technology company, is developing a new application for smart parking. They were testing this in Barcelona. So Copenhagen called Cisco in Silicon Valley, said this is really interesting, can we meet? Cisco said, sure, come and see us. So a few months later, Copenhagen went to visit Cisco in San Francisco. They met with the person at Cisco, a project manager responsible for this parking application. Actually, the mayor of Copenhagen came along. He was actually very angry because they met with this low-level person. He said, why didn't I meet with the CEO? You introduced me to this low-level person. Turns out this low-level person was so impressed, he told some of his colleagues. And a few months later, a delegation from Cisco, from their global smart city team, went to Copenhagen. Copenhagen introduced them to different stakeholders in the city, municipalities, procurement officers. And a few months later, Copenhagen actually won 2 test projects. One was at the airport to test different technologies related to flow of people through the airport. One was at the train station. And a few months later, they signed an MOU with 3 of the municipal governments in the Copenhagen region to test and develop more technologies. So far, Cisco has not invested. They've tested. All they're doing is testing technologies. And if we stop here, they could have tested this anywhere. Do you have an airport? Yes? You might not all have a train station, but they could have tested this anywhere. The only thing Copenhagen did was approach them first. That's it. And open some doors for them. So this could have been tested anywhere. Cisco is testing things right here. In Dubai and in Abu Dhabi, they're testing things all over the world. They're testing things in India. Just like Siemens, they will go where the opportunity takes them. So this turned into some MOUs. Then one of Cisco's chief executives, he's the chief globalization officer, went to Copenhagen. Copenhagen invited him to speak at a conference. He was the keynote speaker at the conference, came to Copenhagen, signed another MOU. A few months later, normally there's a video clip, but we don't have online access here. Cisco actually celebrated their 30th anniversary. There's a short video on there. They mentioned Copenhagen as one of the highlights of their history. So they actually promoted the location. Copenhagen didn't pay them for that. Massive promotion. They're still engaging. Now look at this timeline. It's November 2012. We're talking really about 2 years. Some of you might be thinking, well, so what? Copenhagen helped Cisco make money. Where's the benefit? Well, the benefit is Cisco actually created 4 jobs in 2013, 20 in 2014. They've committed to creating another 40. Highly paid, highly skilled jobs. You know what the great thing is? They didn't compete with anyone for these jobs. This was not, shall we create the jobs in Stockholm or Copenhagen? These jobs were only ever going to Copenhagen. The other thing is, Cisco is promoting Copenhagen for free. And the other, finally, thing is, Copenhagen is actually promoting itself as very different from the other smart city locations. So to end the success factors here, what did Copenhagen do well? They were very targeted. They didn't say we want to attract ICT. They didn't say we want to attract smart cities. They looked at an intelligent transportation application. They had a great value proposition. They helped Cisco do business. They understood the business drivers. And finally, this is a long-term relationship building approach. This is not about, do you have a project, come and put it here. This is about, we will help you, you will help us, we're going to develop a relationship. And to end today's session, I think this is the new model. If you're trying to attract high-tech investment, innovative investment, the traditional approach, let's find a company that has a project, let's compete, let's provide incentives, no longer works. This is what companies are expecting from you. And companies will go anywhere, literally anywhere, Bogota, Copenhagen, Dubai, if this is what you do. Okay, so I realize this might seem a little extreme, a little far-fetched, but it's real and it works. And I'd like to end it there and also open it up to questions. Here's the first question.
Well, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation and a very interesting case study. My question on this one, especially when we want to keep it real, is, and I'm sure many of us who work in investment promotion have noticed this, that getting that first meeting, making a cold call for something as big as a foreign investment, what would be your thoughts and advice on making that successful?
We make cold calls all the time. So Katerina is here probably should be making like 30 a week, but so our team does this all the time. We're calling companies to talk about their investment plans. You have two options. You can call them and say, "Hi, I'm calling to find out whether you want to invest in Qatar." No. What Copenhagen did is they called and said, "Hey, we read that article about your smart parking application. Really phenomenal. Did you know we're developing something similar in Copenhagen? Would you like to meet?" Which approach do you think resonates more? So that's the message here is, if you're cold calling companies, you're more likely to get a result if you're targeted and you've thought before what the driver of the company might be, what could be attractive. It requires a lot of research, it requires a lot of preparation, but it's ultimately what differentiates you from a telemarketer or people who use a very broad approach.
So before calling the company, we make the research and ask open questions. And always have like backup, so why you call it.
Any other questions?
So just a comment. So for IPAs, the information is not as we have seen, the most important part from the intelligence unit. You can process this information. That might be a key point for IPAs.
Information is important, so.
But the way you process this information, so you can build something else.
Exactly. So I mean, if a company asks you for information, of course you have to provide it. But this is more proactive. This is not waiting for the company to ask you. It's going to the company first and making them an offer they can't refuse. So.
What I've gathered so far, I'll just give an example with my own country. I think political will is really important.
Yes.
Because we had a situation where we had a president that was there for 8 years, and supported investment inflow into the country. And now we have a president that is not too into, investment inflow. And we now realize that the inflow was declining. And this is because of the lack of or the reduced political will.
Yes.
So I think political will is really
Huge. It starts with political will. If you don't have that, everything else becomes much harder. Yes.
So basically, what they did was they researched and they found a need and they filled it.
Exactly.
So you have to find that need to fill it, and everything else follows.
They found the need, but they also thought about what is it we do really well.
Yes.
Andreas, I mean, Copenhagen's investment promotion agency is rich.
No.
Investment promotion regime, but certainly the budget is much larger than a lot of the majority of investment promotion agencies in the developing world. They're understaffed, they don't have really talent, or very few, and they don't have the budgets to do that type of research as pointed that targeting strategy requires. So what would be your advice to the majority of investment promotion
Is
agencies?
to use a consultant.
Was made my idea.
No. Copenhagen may seem like a rich agency, but actually Copenhagen has, don't tell them I told you this, they have 9 people here.
And their budget for the
Their budget
operating,
is
it's
really
certainly
not expensive.
some.
And I would argue that, especially if you have a tight budget, this is the way to go. Because this allows you to use your money more effectively. The person who did the research was an intern. Didn't cost them a lot of money. It is more complicated, but you don't need a lot of money. It's certainly not as expensive as putting advertisements in the Financial Times or in CNN. So,
It's more difficult. You
Yeah.
have to be focused and results from longer term.
no, few of you are falling asleep, so we've achieved our objective.
Excuse me.
So we will get the email.
You will if you put your name and email address on the form, or give us your card.
Well, excuse me, if I may add, all of you were advised to give your business cards as you go out. Someone will be there to collect it. We're also going to have a group photo right after this all together, and for all the speakers, please need your contact info as well. We'd like to talk to you first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And